I read 8 books in January, which is a lot. Gonna take the next little bit of time to go through them, give a rating, and my opinion of it. So let's get into it. The first book I read was In the Weeds by B.K. Borson. Oddly enough, I have read the other 2 books in this series, the Love Light Farm series. For some reason, I started with the 3rd book and then went backwards to the first and the second one. Don't have an explanation for that. But I was in the bookstore browsing and picked it up and read the 3rd book first in December, and I really enjoyed that book. I liked the couple, I liked the setting. It was kind of interesting jumping into the last one, even though I think they can be read in any order. It's not like a sequential series. But you kind of see all the characters from books 1 and 2, them in their final form. So I read the 3rd book first, then went back to the first one, and just from seeing the characters in the 3rd and the 1st book, I already knew them from this one, and I was like, I'm gonna like the 2nd book the most because I want to see that couple the most. So I was really excited to read this one. It was good. I did really like the characters. However, nothing happened in the book. It was just kind of them interacting with each other. Obviously, the love story is happening, but in the other 2 books, at least there was an arrangement or some deal that was happening that made the characters have to fake date, or they're trying to save the farm, or something with the bakery is happening. And so there were other plot points in the first 2 books that were happening at the same time as the romance, as the love story. And so that made it a bit more interesting for me. This one, nothing happened. It was just the love story and just the characters, which again, I really liked the characters, but I just wish more had happened. The main conflict of this book was from the male character's perspective. He's afraid of people leaving him, which is a valid fear, but his entire family is portrayed as extremely loving and extremely involved in his life. And so there's not like a lot of merit to this fear. It felt kind of just thrown in there to make us feel sorry for him. It just wasn't super compelling. So I did enjoy it. It was a fast read. I liked the series as a whole. I was a bit disappointed with this. So I give this a 3 out of 5 stars. The second book that I read was Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This was on Amazon's bestseller list of 2023 for a while. Very highly rated. I loved this book. It follows kind of 3 main characters. One is this 70-year-old woman, another is this 30-year-old guy, and then the 3rd character that it follows is an octopus. And the octopus is the only one in the book with first-person narrative, which was kind of fun. The older woman, Tova, is thinking about retirement and doesn't really have any family. Her husband died, her brother recently died, and she lost her son when he was 18, mysteriously. So she just lives a very quiet, simple life, works at the aquarium, and befriends the octopus, Marcellus, who's on the cover right here. And then the other character, Cameron, I think is his name, Cameron, he's kind of this 30-year-old who's really, really smart, but is lacking in ambition and just a product of hardship. And he goes looking for his biological father. And then he meets Tova, he meets the octopus. It's just a really beautiful tale. It's very simple. The story is not necessarily incredibly complex, but it's just, it felt like a warm hug is the way that I was describing it to people. What I really liked about this writing style is when you switch in between all the characters, obviously the octopus is first person, Tova and Cameron are third person narrative, but somehow the author really writes them from a super obvious perspective. She changes her writing style based on what character you're following, even if it's not immediately evident who it is, whereas Tova's chapters, the sentence structure and the thoughts that you're hearing are very kind of matter of fact. They're very slow paced and thought through, and Cameron's sentence structure and the writing in his chapters is like a bit chaotic and all over the place, and it's really fun to see how she switches writing styles to represent the characters. And Marcellus's chapters are just funny. I laughed out loud in multiple parts. It's heartwarming. It's a very heartfelt story. Highly recommend. And I gave this one 5 stars. That's great. Gave it 5 stars. So. The next book that I read was The Chalice of the Gods, which is a Percy Jackson book. I grew up on Percy Jackson. That was kind of my Harry Potter. I didn't read Harry Potter until I was older, but Percy Jackson was my childhood book. I'm 12 years old and asking to be driven to Borders at the time, not Barnes & Noble, picking up the next book in the series because it had just come out. And I haven't done that with a lot of series. Usually I'm behind for whatever reason. Things are already completely out, they're already written, and so I just get to buy every book at once and read it all through. But Percy Jackson was the series where I was waiting for the books to come out. And I absolutely adored that series. And then Heroes of Olympus came out, and I read all of those books as well. Didn't like it as much as the original series, but it's fun kind of growing up with the characters. I definitely thought that the story was concluded with Percy. Maybe he would be a cameo in some other things that Rick Riordan, Uncle Rick, is writing. This one was really a return to that original series. The only characters that you follow are the original 3 from the original series, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover. That was really fun to go back to that and to be first person perspective with Percy again, because if you've ever read the original books, he's very funny, very chaotic, very sarcastic. It was just nostalgic to come back to those characters. It follows Percy as he is preparing for college. He's a senior in high school. He's going to high school in New York, living with his family, and him and Annabeth are preparing to go to college together. And Percy is kind of facing actual real-life adult human problems and not save the world from monsters and titans and the actual literal Earth problems. So that was interesting. I think from a storytelling perspective, this was the worst Percy book that I've read. Honestly, if it was any other characters, any other series, if this was the beginning of a brand new IP, it's a really boring book. Nothing really happens that much. And I think it's going to be a trilogy, or at least there's going to be more books that come out. Uncle Rick just announced the next one in this series. Yeah, it's like a fine story. But because it's a return to the original characters and you get Percy's perspective, it was really fun. I don't think that if you're picking up this book as like the first Percy book you read, you're probably not going to like it. But if you've grown up with the characters, if you've spent a lot of time with the characters, it just is exciting to be with them again and to just kind of follow the original 3 and not jump around to all these new side characters with different perspectives. So I had a lot of fun with it. Objectively, is it a good book? Not great. I rated it a 3, but it's probably a 2. But for me personally, it's a 3 because I had fun with it and I missed the characters. So the next book that I read was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. You'd kill to be on it. This was a book of the month pick from probably a long time ago. I don't actually know when this was available on Book of the Month. I have been a part of Book of the Month for a while, and I'm kind of the person that chooses a book each month. I usually doesn't read it right away, and so I just have this giant stack of monthly books that I've received that at one point sounded interesting to me, and then I just kind of meander on into my book stack and look through all of my book of the month picks and grab one off the shelf that sounds interesting. That's what I did with this one. I don't know what month it was part of, what even year, but I had heard good things, I think, about this book, and I've definitely heard good things about the author. As a disclaimer, I'm not usually a mystery reader or a murder mystery reader. I don't have a lot of experience with them. I don't really like them that much. It's just not the genre that I typically pick, but for whatever reason, I was in the mood to kind of try it out, and it looked not super big, so something that I could read quickly, so I gave it a shot. It follows 5 characters: the bride, one of the wedding guests, the best man, the wedding planner, and the bridesmaid, who is also the bride's half-sister. And they all have first-person perspective, which is a lot to jump between 5 different POVs, especially in a 311-page book. It's not long, so between 5 different perspectives and little interludes of like third-person just narrative injections, you don't spend a lot of time with the characters themselves, so you don't really get to know them that much, but you know they're all important to the story. Basically, you know that somebody's going to die, but you don't know who it is as you're reading. It's only revealed kind of later on who dies, and then it's revealed who the killer is. All 5 of these characters, you come to realize, have motive to kill the victim. So as a reader, you're trying to figure out who did it. Every single one of the characters is absolutely miserable. They hate their lives. They suck at being human beings, and they're not fun to read about. So that was kind of difficult for me to get through. It's not fun reading about miserable people. There were also a lot of coincidences that by the end of it, you're like, oh, okay, that's how that's being explained. And it's a little bit far-fetched, which I don't know if most mystery books do that anyway, but it was a little unbelievable. There were, to be fair, a couple of surprising reveals that had me exclaiming in the middle of the read, but it just kept happening so much that by the end of it, it felt a little discredited that we're still trying to get these big reveals going on. So I didn't have a lot of fun with this one. I don't know if it's because I'm not a mystery reader or if it's because it's not a great book. I gave this one 2.5 stars. The next book that I read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This was another go to a bookstore, browse the romance section, and pick up on a whim type book. I have read one other Emily Henry book before. It was a couple years ago. I think it was People We Meet on Vacation, but I always get that mixed up with Beach Read because they have like orangey yellow covers. But I'm almost positive it was People We Meet on Vacation. And even though I can't remember the title of the book confidently, I know I really liked that book. And I've heard so many great things about Emily Henry as an author, as a romance author, and so I thought it would be a good time to kind of explore some more of her books. This is the story of Nora and Charlie, and it kind of pokes fun at the Hallmark romance movies where there is a big city character that goes to a small town, meets a small town character, and their entire perspective of life has changed, and then they decide to stay in the small town and run a farm or something. And it's kind of poking fun at that the whole time, where both Nora and Charlie are the big city characters, but they actually love the big city and they don't want to stay in the small town. So that was kind of a unique perspective. They meet, they have a small town romance, but the whole time they're like, wow, I just wish I was getting back to the city right now. Great banter, not really enemies to lovers, but dislike to friends to lovers. And it was really sweet. It was well written. Emily Henry is a queen of dialogue. And I think it's because she develops her characters so well. She creates the rules about the characters and then she sticks to them. And so everything they do, everything they say, it feels believable and it feels real because this is what she's told you that they do. This is how she's told you that they will react to things. And she really does stick to her own rules, which I appreciate because not everybody does that. So the character development is really good. She will write these full pages of dialogue, these full sequences of dialogue, not have a lot of explanation after it, but just because you know the characters so well, you can tell by one line, oh, they said that sarcastically, or they're getting mad right now, or they're very embarrassed about that one thing. And I really loved that. It's so subtle that you don't even realize that it's happening, but I would get to the end of a long dialogue scene and kind of have to sit there for a second and be like, wow, I really feel like I was there in that moment because it was just written so well. And I think it was written so well because she develops the character so well. So I super enjoyed this book. However, weirdly enough, I think it was too long. It's like 370 pages and it was a very quick and easy read, But I got to about page 300 and was ready for a wrap up. It felt like the story had run its course by that point, or there were things that were getting kind of dragged out, which is not something that I usually say about these types of books, but it honestly felt a little bit too long. I also really liked that this focused on a sibling relationship as well as a romantic relationship, and that was like 50% of the book as well. So I really liked it. I think I gave this an obnoxiously specific 3.75. So, on to the next. Oh boy, this one's a doozy. Argylle by Ellie Conway. To be honest, I did pick this up because of the speculation that Taylor Swift wrote this book. I don't actually think that she did write it, because she doesn't have that kind of time on her hands. But the madness surrounding this was enough to get me interested. If you don't know, in December of 2022, a author profile popped up on Instagram and posted that their debut book called Argylle was being published soon. Everybody was like, cool, somebody's writing a book, that's great. But what was interesting is that a couple months later, she posted again and was like, wow, my book got picked up for a movie and Matthew Vaughn is directing it. Isn't that cool? And then everybody was confused because nobody knows who this author is. She has never shown her face on the internet. This is her first book that she's ever had published. And before it gets published, it gets picked up for a movie. So now everybody's interested. And then the trailer for the movie called Argylle comes out. The movie is about an author named Ellie Conway that writes spy novels about a character called Agent Argylle, and then it starts to become true in the movie. Things that she writes starts to become true. But the book that she's publishing is the Agent Argylle series that the movie talks about. So now everybody is convinced at this point that Ellie Conway is not a real human. But then who is she? Who is writing under this pseudonym? Is it Taylor Swift? Probably not. Is it J.K. Rowling? Probably not. Nobody knows. Because of the insane marketing scheme that is happening right now, I was very interested in it and picked it up the day it came out, which I think was January 9th. Read it very quickly. And it is just about this guy, flat-topped, named Agent Aubrey Argylle, and his origin story about how he basically becomes a spy and mixed up in espionage. The Russians are in it, and everybody's looking for the Amber Room, which is a real thing, I learned after some light Googling, that was at one point considered to be the eighth wonder of the world and was lost around World War II. And the book follows the CIA and the Russians racing against each other to find the lost Amber Room. This book really made me not realize, but kind of made me more settled in the fact that I am a character reader. I would prefer a book that focuses and develops good characters that I feel emotionally connected to versus a book that has a really great plot, but the characters are duds, which was this book. It honestly was a really cool plot, and I think that it actually would be a good movie. It felt like it was written in a bit of an older literature style way, where books focused really heavily on story and plot and having an epic plot line, but they don't really care about their characters and they don't really spend time developing them at all. That was the case in this one. It was an epic storyline, but the actual characters that I was following, you're told that they do a lot, but there's no character development, there's no emotional connection, personally, for me. Now, this is funny because I just talked about how in this book, in the weeds, nothing happened, but I liked the characters, but it was a boring book, and I complained about it. So, in a perfect world, you could have both an awesome plot and awesome characters that you can really connect to. But alas, that's not the case here. I would still prefer the other version. I would prefer to be able to connect with characters and like characters and enjoy following them on this journey. But I really felt nothing for these guys. But the plot was cool. The thing that broke my brain about this book, though, is that there are 11 pages, seemingly random pages, with a strange symbol, asterisk, flower, star, whatever you want to call it. Let's see if this works. You can see on the bottom there, somewhere, there's like a little flower on 11 of the pages. And I don't understand it. I literally obsessively tried to figure it out. I wrote all the page numbers down. It gets up to like page 353. I counted words. I counted letters. I did math to try to find perhaps a date or something, and nothing added up. And there is nothing on the internet of what these symbols mean, and I refuse to believe that it's a misprint, although I haven't tested that theory and gone to the store to see if it is a misprint. If the internet could do me a solid and somebody could figure out this code or puzzle or whatever, that would be great, because it's driving me insane. But I am really excited to see the movie, because I just want to know who the author is, I want to know what the story's going to be like, and I want to applaud this insane marketing ploy. I give this 3 stars. The same as In the Weeds, for different reasons. Good plot, bad characters. The next book I read was My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Friedrich Backman. This is the guy that wrote A Man Called Ove, which then became the movie A Man Called Otto. My sisters and a friend of mine, we do like a little mini book club thing where one person picks a book every quarter and then everybody reads it. We go together and talk about it. So this is one of the picks from that book club, and it was really great. I loved the writing style. It follows this little girl, Elsa, after her grandmother dies, and she has to go around to this apartment complex that they live in and deliver letters from her grandmother to people that is saying she's sorry. The grandmother is very eccentric and quirky and a real prankster, and so she has a lot to be sorry for. It was really well written, very whimsical. It reminded me so much of one of my favorite books, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which, if you haven't read, highly recommend. It was so similar that I actually looked up when they were written. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was written first. I don't think that actually dictates anything to do with this book, but they're both kind of from the perspective of a young child who's very smart, had to grow up kind of too quickly, that's going on a quest from a dead family member. It's so whimsical. It deals a lot in just childhood imagination and the stories that we tell each other, and family ties, and it was really, really sweet. He is pretty notorious for writing on darker or sadder subject matter, but kind of doing it in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, funny way. And I think that was accurate with this book. Everybody said that they were gonna cry in it. I got almost to the end. I was feeling so cocky that I hadn't cried yet. And I got to a part in it that hurt me. And I cried very hard. If you've read it, you understand. But I love the writing style. I think that there were a couple plot points that felt underdeveloped and maybe complicating the entire story a little bit too much outside of the delivering letters to neighbors. I think if that was just simplified and everything only focused on that, it would have been a 5-star read. But because there were just a few things, I'm giving it a 4-star, which is still very, very high. And I just thought it was great. Last one. House of Sky and Breath, a Crescent City novel by Sarah J. Maas. I'm actually about 200 pages into this one right now. I have had this book on my shelf since it came out because I read ACOTAR for the first time then, and then was naturally obsessed and moved on to Crescent City, which had just recently been published, like the year before or something. Finished Crescent City, and then this book just came out. Crescent City I don't actually remember what that's called. I know it's not called Crescent City, but it's the red one. House of something. As many people have expressed, very complicated and difficult to understand. And so thick, so many pages. But man, the ending is pretty explosive. I read that a couple of years ago, and then this one came out, and I just kind of lost steam with it a bit. Wasn't quite getting there. And so I never read it. I never finished it. I tried, and I couldn't get through it because maybe I just wasn't in the mood. But then I have since reread ACOTAR. I have read Throne of Glass now recently for the first time. And with the newest book coming out January 30th, I figured it was probably time to get through it so that I can be on time and ready for when it comes out. So I reread the first Crescent City, and I think it was honestly because I had already read it before, but the second time through was so much better. It was probably because I was familiar with it and I kind of understood the world a little bit more, so it was easier to focus on the plot. I loved it the second time through. It is so cinematic and exciting at the end. Got very emotional when certain people died. So now I'm about 200 pages into this one, and it's going to be a sprint to the finish line to finish this in January. It is the 26th right now, and so I have 4 days to finish it, to finish 600 more pages so that I can get the next book when it comes out. So let's do it. Let's finish it. It is January 30th at 6:41 p.m. I have a cold, but that did not stop me from getting it done. And it is done. House of Sky and Breath has been finished. The ending was long since spoiled for me, but that was my own fault since I waited like a year and a half to actually read it. But it's okay, it didn't really bother me that much. I still felt extremely excited towards the end as things were building. I think in comparison to the first Crescent City novel, House of Earth and Blood, this one was a bit of a slower build, which was surprising to me because you get all of the world building in the first one, and so I kind of expected the second one to be a lot more exciting and fast-paced because we had already gotten all of the world building in the first book, but it kind of was a slow build, which I didn't necessarily mind, especially coming off of the first one with all of the action that was in it at the end. It was kind of nice to just slot into the characters' lives for a little bit and just relax with them and get to know some of the side characters that we hadn't spent a lot of time with in the first one. I really enjoyed it. I did think the end was amazing. The entire time I was just thinking that it must be very difficult to be Sarah J. Maas writing books right now because she's kind of just built this extreme reputation for herself where everybody is obsessed with everything she's done, ACOTAR, Throne of Glass, and now she's just competing with the hype of all of those past books, which is something that people complained about a lot when Crescent City came out, and I think most of them were just complaining because it wasn't ACOTAR and it wasn't Throne of Glass. The characters are just as well developed as the first series that she's written. They are just as exciting and fun. Something she does so well is ensembles, groups of characters, and building a family or the found family trope within each story. And I loved that about this series. I loved that about ACOTAR and Throne of Glass. And I think her bid at the end of this book to kind of tie it all together into one multiverse, if you will, was sort of bringing along those people that weren't as excited for Crescent City because it wasn't the characters that they were so obsessed with so far. And I like that. I don't mind that. But I also think that she can stand on her own with her writing. She's going to have to. She can't tie characters in forever. So I'm excited to see what is going to happen in the future. So I think I'm going to rate this one a 4. I gave my second reread of the first book a 5. This one, I think I'm gonna give a 4. It's not quite as good as the first book in my opinion, but still very strong. And that means
on to the next.